Hello, thank you. I am not going to stand here and get blinded. I'm just going to move over to the side. So, expectation setting. I am not a security practitioner. I am a network engineer, not in the legal sense of the word engineer. And this is based on, I think I worked it out to be 46 years in the communications business. So there's facts in here and there's opinions in here. I'm okay if you just treat them all as facts. But these are the opinions that I have come to develop after 40 plus years in the business. Some of you are going to disagree violently with things I say. Some of you might even get angry. That's fine. Well, as long as it's the opinions, not the facts. That's fine. This is my view, not yours. I really, really hate PowerPoint, and I'm not very good at it. So font sizes and lots of things are a little bit screwy. Sorry. You'll notice it if you download this later. So what I'm aiming to cover is how does networking actually work? Because you all have jobs that depend on networking. Many of you, not all by any stretch, but many of you have never had a reason to drill down to the very bottom of the stack and really fully understand how that works at that level. Or if you have, it's maybe once or twice a year at most. There's a lot of gaps in the knowledge when I deal with security people. I'm not talking about Travis. The other thing is, when does Hanlon's razor apply? Because a lot of the things that happen in the networking world are not security events. They are just faults in the hardware. So moving on, Hanlon's razor. In case you haven't heard of this, it's originally described as never attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by stupidity. Or the British version is much more concise, cock-ups, not conspiracies. So if something's going wrong at the networking layer, 99.999% of the time, it's because someone was incompetent or someone made a mistake, not because someone is attacking you. 0.01% of the time, yes, it's because someone is attacking you. I'm not saying that never happens, just it's vanishingly small at the network layer. So please, stop believing that everything is an attack at the network layer. It's not. As I just said this, almost everything could be an attack. No, it's a screw-up of some sort. There is a tendency, in my experience, for some security people to assume that absolutely every possible attack vector that could ever exist, and a whole bunch that literally, according to the laws of science, can't exist, is something that must be defended against aggressively in every single scenario, including not trusting anything or any of the features that the network gives you. Sure, that gives you an ultra secure setup. It also doesn't do anything useful. So there is a balance between defending against everything and making everything 100% secure and actually having a useful, usable network. Networking. I am going to skim right through this section. So a lot of these slides were originally developed as an educational tool, not a talk. They're still in here in case somebody wants to download the slides. So really quickly, networking is actually not hard. Understanding the complexities can be hard, and there's a lot of stuff that you don't get until you have experience in it, but the basics are not hard. It's just binary math and Boolean logic. Really, one Boolean operation, and binary math. You probably can't read this, but I explained binary math in one slide. Moving on. Okay, so I cheated to fit that all on one slide, admittedly, but it's It's really not that hard once you understand the fundamental premise of how binary works. If you don't get it, don't worry about it for this talk. If you want like a 10,000 foot overview, download the slides later. It will explain it. So binary logic is the other thing, and the logic is key. There is no equivalent in standard decimal math. But we do have equivalents in light switches. Who here has a 3-way light switch at the top and bottom of a staircase in their home? Just about everyone. That is a binary OR operation. We don't usually run into binary ANDs in our houses, but if you have a master valve that turns off the water to your house, and then you've got a faucet on your sink, that's a binary AND. Like we run into these examples all day, every day, we just don't know it. So it's really not that hard. I go over the operations. Not, and, and or are the three things you might run into in networking. XOR exists. You don't see it in networking. Not realistically. I cover multi-digit logic. Oh, that's really, really tiny. Okay, sorry. I thought this would be readable. Failures, 99.999% human error. We don't attack binary math. Like, how do you attack math? I'm sure someone in this room has an answer for that. That's fine. Generally speaking, you don't attack concepts. You attack things, artifacts. So when there is some sort of a failure, almost always is somebody screwed up. There is such a thing as circuit failure. Like the chips in the switches and routers and firewalls and whatnot, those can degrade. You can subject them to EMP attacks, overvoltage attacks, undervoltage attacks. There's ways to make the binary math fail in hardware. But it's not the actual math that's failing, it's the hardware. There are some known errors. For those of you who are old enough, there's the Pentium div bug, which not trivial to exploit in a security sense, but the bug is there. It's a good example. There have been MMU bugs that have been subject to real-world attacks in the past. But those problems ultimately come down to how does an attacker affect the electrical signals inside the computer at that level of precision. Not impossible, but really, 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 really hard. So if you aren't being attacked by the Mossad, the NSA, et cetera, it's probably just a bug or a bad piece of hardware. I'm not covering this really, it's out of scope. Networking is organized in layers. If you want to think of it as encapsulations, that also works, but normally we talk about layers. And it is very, very strongly organized into layers. As I've said, encapsulation also works as a mental model. Layering violation is a bad thing. But it doesn't mean that the layering is broken per se. It means that someone just went, screw it, I can make this work. And, sort of blew all of your standard assumptions out of the water. But it works! Great, good for you. Nobody else but you can troubleshoot it. Congratulations. The OSI stack is what we talk about mostly when we talk about layers. It's way out of date. It's hugely problematic. Nothing has replaced it, so we still talk about it. The stack is organized into these first 4 layers. There's more. Everything past, 5 and 6, irrelevant to the internet. 7 is the application, whatever the app itself is doing. But the first 4 are what networkers care about. Physical layer, that's your cables, basically. Data link layer, that's Ethernet, raw Ethernet. Almost no one ever deals with raw Ethernet unless you're a network engineer. The network layer is IP. You guys mostly don't even deal with IP. You're actually dealing, for the most part, there's lots of exceptions, but for the most part, you're dealing with layer 4, which is TCP, UDP, the protocols at that layer, where you can actually get applications to respond to you, and or attackers can get applications to do unwanted things. So the first three, however, are what I worry about, and those first three are the areas where InfoSec practitioners tend to be the weakest because it's not your area. Like, this isn't what you focus on. As a hierarchy, is that like reasonably visible to people? Okay. So it's very hierarchical. As I said a minute ago, it's all layers or encapsulation. We'll get there in a sec. Key thing to understand here, not every single layer, for example, the layer 2 here, not every single layer or abstraction has child layers. Sometimes it just stops there. I can have, like, for example, if this is raw Ethernet at layer 2, I can run raw Ethernet. That's legit. There are some things that do that. Some HDMI to Ethernet adapters, for example. Just package the HDMI packets, stuff it into an Ethernet packet, no protocol, and just blast it to the other end. That's a layer 2 device. They're unusual, they're uncommon, but they exist. Layer 3 would be raw IP. I tried, and I can't think of a single example that is just pure raw IP. I'm sure there's some out there. If you can think of one, let me know, but the magic all happens at layer 4, because that's where we actually get to talk to applications, like web servers. If you look at it as encapsulations, all the data is encapsulated inside a layer 4 packet, which is encapsulated inside a layer 3 packet, which is encapsulated inside a layer 2 packet, which, well, is encapsulated inside the layer 1 stuff as well. So it's both ways of thinking of it are legit. It's fine. I will get to some of the details in here. Can I see a timer on my screen? Yes, I can. So vis-a-vis security. And this is, I would argue, one of the most important slides I have here. Your security domain, generally speaking, there are exceptions, but generally speaking, your security domain encompasses multiple layer 2 domains, which encompass layer 3 domains, which encompass layer 4 domains. Your security domains, generally speaking, do not start in the middle of this diagram. If you have a need to do that, there are products that can help you and there are techniques that can help you, but that is not the normal case. So unless you are deliberately introducing a layering violation, all your layer 4 stuff is organized into layer 3 domains, which is organized into layer 2 domains, which comprise your security domain. And that is, unless you're doing something really, really funky, that is written in stone. So I have had, as an example, I've had security people say, we can't have multiple VLANs inside a single security domain. Why? And the answer is, because they didn't understand that VLANs are part of a security domain. They had no idea what the thing was. It was just some scary networking concept. And now this relationship is critical. I'm going to repeat it in a different view. Most firewalls, and yes, I understand firewalls are not the be-all and end-all of security domains, but we're going with firewalls here as the example, because that's what lives on the network. We'll have multiple layer 2 domains. Those layer 2 domains will have one or more layer 3 domain, and each layer 3 domain typically has a whole bunch of layer 4 domains. A layer 4 domain, by the way, you know it better as an IP address. So this is one IP address on a device. Maybe there's load balancers, maybe there's more than one device, but generally speaking, one device. So you've got a device that has a whole bunch of layer 4 ports open. It has a single IP address inside an IP subnet. The IP subnet lives on either a VLAN or a non-VLAN single subnet network. And that all feeds into, so if I use Palo Alto networking terminology, security zone in the firewall. And I think most firewalls have some concept of a security zone, and that's what you're grouping your layer 2 VLANs into. So when I say a security domain, think zone. Multiple subnets in a zone. Layering attacks. There's no such thing. What there is a lot of attacks focused on the corner cases at the edges or at the layer boundaries, because that's where you have the least eyeballs looking at the code. That's where you have the most, what do we call it, questionable interpretations of standards. Not everybody will read a standard and implement it the exact same way. So when you go from layer 2 to layer 3 at that boundary, you can have problems. And that's where your attacks are focused in the networking world. It's still relatively uncommon, but it does exist. Key point here, the internet works by convention. Yeah, there's tons and tons and tons of RFCs and standards that govern how the networks work, but there's probably 10 times that of stuff that just everybody does it the same way. If you don't do it the same way, hey, maybe there's some commercial advantage in that and your company is going to make $1 million in the next 5 weeks, or more likely, you're just not going to be able to interoperate with anything. And you're going to find that out the hard way. There is no way to discover what the conventions are other than just experience, as far as I know, which kind of sucks. Going back to Hanlon's razor, layering violations. They always happen, everywhere, left, right, and center. Mostly because people are incompetent. And by the way, when I use the word incompetent in this talk, I'm going to use it a few more times, I do not mean that you are a useless, worthless person. I just mean that you have not developed the training, the skills, and the expertise to truly be competent at a certain thing. That's what I mean by incompetent, okay? So incompetence abounds in the networking field. And there's no way around it. It just does. So you can't attack a layer. It's a concept. But, yeah, this is what I said. The attacks are focused on getting to a lower layer undetected so that you can then bounce back up in some way that's unexpected and not being flagged, not being logged, not being blocked. And that does happen. If you see something in this field, in this area, and you're like, is this an attack? Is this not an attack? This is the one place where I'm like 50-50. Yeah, this might be bad. Or 50-50, dumbasses. It's not clear. This is, layering attacks happen when they happen. Layer boundary attacks happen is what I'm trying to say. When they happen, yeah, they happen. It's not a myth. They do exist. So layer 1, physical, copper, fiber, Wi-Fi. There is basically nothing left in 2024 besides those 3. Yes. Yep. Yep. There was a famous example back in the 90s of someone running ArcNet on their barbed wire fence on their ranch instead of running new cabling. And within the last decade, someone actually proved that they could run 10 megabit half-duplex Ethernet on a relatively short section, like 100 meters of barbed wire. I do not recommend running your network on barbed wire, just to be clear. It's not a realistic thing nowadays. But copper, fiber, Wi-Fi, that's going to cover 99.999% of everything in 2024. Everything else, you're already dealing with experts, and you're already dealing with niche or corner cases. And at that point, just go talk to them. That gets chopped off. Key takeaway, never assume your patch cord is okay just because it's brand new out of the box. I have seen less bad cables fresh out of the package from a factory than I have homemade cables, but it's definitely not a 100% success rate with factory-made cables either. If you don't have a tester, fine, you don't have a lot of choice, you just trust it and hope for the best. If you do have a tester, you'll find about a 2% failure rate on cables like straight from a factory. When you have a problem, I'm just going to go over the effect. You have CRC errors, silent retries and retransmissions. Silent is the key. Unless you're gathering data from the NICs on every single computer on your network, you will not know this problem exists until it just fails or becomes so bad that the computer's unusable. There are some ways to find this out and track it, but mostly, no, you're just wait for it to die. Solution, use only BICSI or AMP certified cables and installers. That's not realistic for almost everyone. BICSI certified or AMP certified installers will actually plug every single cable into the certification unit on site and give you the piece of paper that swears that yes, it's certified, and yes, we're going to give you a warranty on this cable for the next 5 years, and. It also, unsurprisingly, costs a small fortune to do that. So no one does it. Use patch cords with factory molded boots. That's all I got. That's about as good as we have in the industry. Copper faults and attacks. Statistically, 100% of attacks or faults are just faults, not attacks. The number of significant digits we'd need on that 100%, or that 99% more accurately, to represent how many were really attacks is very, very large. Not saying it has never happened. It has. There's been documented cases. But the odds of any one of us in this room seeing it in our lifetimes is functionally zero. Again, unless you're working for like the NSA and you're going into AT&T and tapping all their cables. And if you are, don't tell me, I don't want to know. Flip side, it's trivially easy to tap into copper cables with the right equipment. Like trivial. Show up and you're done in 5 minutes. And nobody will ever notice. So solution, physical security. Because you don't have any Ethernet jacks like in your reception area or your hallways or near your bathrooms or anything like that, right? Right? Yeah. This is a common misconception. Just turning off the switch port does not prevent people from attacking you this way. It just means that you'll never know. It does help, but it also removes your ability to detect. So decide which side you want to come down on there. And as we all know, physical security is really hard, and it's a huge pain in the ass. So who does it? Most just don't. Like, I can walk into banks and plug into their office network without anybody noticing, without any issue. I can walk into federal government buildings and plug into their network without anybody noticing, with no issue. Like, physical security is the solution. It's also hard. No one does it. We do not have a good solution for this in the networking space. Hanlon's razor replies, it's always a crappy cable. Always. Yeah. Even if you're running a compromised CIA listening post in Moscow, it's still just a faulty cable. And as I put, except for that one time it's not, and good luck figuring that out, because we also don't have really good ways to figure that out. Fiber's a little better. There's really only two common problems with fiber, like actual human error or physical degradation problems. One is you flip the fibers, it's instantly obvious, you have no light, it's dead. Change them around, oh look, the link comes up, done. The solution is just flip the fibers. That's it. This is not a big deal. Dirty ends, however, are much like crappy Cat5 patch cords. You may or may not ever notice until it fails outright. There's no great way to monitor for this at scale, and the solution is just be careful, hygiene, put dust caps on your cables, things like that. In fiber, faults are fairly easy to detect, which is good. They don't scale terribly well, but they're easy enough. Attacks, however, are almost impossible to detect in most cases. I mean, if your attacker is incompetent, fine, but assuming your attacker actually knows what they're doing, good luck figuring out that they've tapped into your cable. The only really accessible tool at a reasonable price point is an OTDR, which will show you every splice and excessive bend and everything in the cable from point A to point B. They're still not cheap. They're like $1,000 each, but you can sort of figure it out. But it's one cable at a time, and you have to take the cable down to test it. So, not great for detecting attacks. This is good news if you're on the red team. It's crappy news if you're on blue team. You can encrypt the bit stream on fiber, which totally protects against physical layer attacks. The gear that does it is usually a lot more expensive and usually overkill. Your mileage may vary. Again, if you can detect the fault, it probably wasn't an attack. So, yeah, this is a problem with the industry. We don't have good solutions for it. As I said, OTDR is highly invasive. Old age is a thing. Some of the fiber that I run on is over 30 years old now, and it's buried in the ground over 30 years ago. I'm not just going to go refresh it. That's a whole construction crew. And sometimes old fiber just goes bad. It has happened. It's not common, but it does happen. If you're doing an OTDR, 99% of the time, those bumps you'll see on the graph is just an installer did a rush job 30 years ago. And that's all there is to it. Now, if you want to go dig up a street to prove that it's just a crappy splice in the middle of the road, well, go for it. Here's the thing, is if you can't identify a patch or a splice or a blip in your OTDR graph, and there's no plausible explanation for why it should be there, yes, that you should go check out and find out what the heck is going on. Radio. Even radios can be dead or flaky out of the box. Anybody who runs a lot of APs knows this very well. They don't all just work. Load patterns, just something that most people don't know. Tilting an access point drastically changes its coverage area. So if you go in and you see an access point that's sitting at 45 degrees, that might be deliberate. Sometimes it's because, you don't care if the bathroom gets Wi-Fi, but the VP's office on the next floor up really needs good Wi-Fi, so somebody went, I'm going to optimize by pointing it there. That's a thing. So if you see an AP that's looks like it's been disturbed and put in a strange position, yeah, and it's not somebody screwing with your network, it's just the installer went, I can get better coverage if I do this. Yeah, this is not really security related, but please turn on roaming in the access points. It does not hurt anymore in 2024. Way back when this was first introduced, there were some problems with it. In 2024, it only helps. If people are saying, no, turn off roaming, it's bad, it's evil, they're out of date. Controllers are good. Controllers are good in terms of being able to monitor what's going on your access points. So from a security standpoint, you want a controller for all of your APs. You don't want controllerless. With one exception, there's controllerless APs that automatically self-organize and one of them becomes a controller, at which point they're not controllerless anymore. So my point stands. You don't want controllerless APs from a security standpoint because you can't see what's going on. And turning your radio power down is both a performance engineering technique and a security engineering technique. And most people don't understand that turning the power down can give you better performance. And it's, in a nutshell, it's because your APs aren't fighting anymore. If you've got them all at max, they're all fighting over the same space. Attacks. So, radio is a shared public medium. Even if you're running point-to-point radios, the Fresnel zone is large. People can sniff on it relatively easily. People can inject data into it relatively easily. Radio, including Wi-Fi, possibly the most insecure way to send information other than smoke signals or billboards. So the good news is every single sane radio standard out there today has encryption built in. Because it's like the bits are sent in the clear. Your data is not. Snooping, trivial. Anybody can walk up with a tin can and capture your radio signals. That means that content length attacks, even encrypted, are trivial. Oracle attacks are, to the extent that they work with Wi-Fi, are trivial. Anything that involves just seeing the encrypted bit stream, trivial on Wi-Fi. So if you really, really care about security, Wi-Fi is not your friend, no matter what your VPs tell you. Also, denial attacks are trivial. You can just flood the RF airspace with garbage, and all your Wi-Fi goes and has a nap for a while. Again, Hanlon's razor. Most radio problems are just shitty design. If you go to a site and there's an access point in every single room to improve coverage, no, that's a shitty design. Now, unless it has been very, very, very carefully engineered. DOS attacks are trivial. Anybody can do it. You don't even need to be a script kiddie to do a DOS attack on Wi-Fi or any other radio. Now, this is a problem. Higher-end access points include spectrum management features, also known as rogue AP detection and isolation or similar terms. This function is indistinguishable from a denial of service attack. Because that's what they're doing. They're doing a DOS attack on all the APs they don't recognize. Well, if anybody pulls out their phone and looks for Wi-Fi networks in the area, how many different Wi-Fi networks are you finding? If one of those turns on spectrum management and it proceeds to try and shut down all the other APs in the area, how many neighboring businesses and homes are suddenly getting screwed? So it has its place, but be aware that when you turn on spectrum management, you are mostly inadvertently causing a DOS attack on your neighbors. This is sometimes okay, sometimes even desirable, but mostly no, that's not cool. If you are not specifically looking for attacks on Wi-Fi, you're not going to find them. There's no good way that I have ever heard of to just passively detect them. I'm sure someone out there is selling, $1 million boxes that do this. I'm not aware of it. I also don't specialize in Wi-Fi, so your mileage may vary here. The attacks you see on radio are overwhelmingly self-inflicted wounds and or accidental, your neighbors turning on spectrum management and disrupting you. Actual intentional attacks, other than denial of service, I don't usually see them. It's a little bit more common than the other layer 1 attacks. Layer 2, data link. Moving on. Ethernet. That's about it. Everything else just emulates Ethernet now. There still are some others, but they're really, really niche and obscure, and you'll only find them in the core networks of giant telcos kind of thing, or the military. So, and if you're with the military, my condolences on this one. So yeah, basically we're focused on Ethernet nowadays, which is good and bad. So every Ethernet-like packet has some headers, some data, and some more stuff. Yep, okay. Leading and trailing stuff, there's no real need to care about it. If you're doing fuzzing attacks, you might want to care about it. Otherwise, no. We don't even care about the data at this layer. The only things we care about, really, are the source MAC address, the destination MAC address, and the VLAN tag. The VLAN tag is what we're going to use to distinguish between those multiple layer 2 domains within a single security domain or zone, quote unquote. Frame size or MTU. All right. If I polled the audience right now, and I'm not going to have you all shout it out, as to what is the standard packet size, that is the minimum number of distinct answers I would expect to get. There is no such thing as a single standard packet size, because every bloody vendor defines it differently. So Cisco says their standard MTU is X, Juniper says their standard MTU is Y, and they're both right, because they both use that word to mean something different. Anytime you're talking about frame sizes, you gotta keep this in mind. If you're talking about the layer 1 with the preambles and all that, you're tacking on an extra 500, well, not 500, but an extra, 18 bytes, I think, something like that no one else knows what you're talking about. And if you're talking about the layer 2, are you talking about layer 2 with the headers or without the headers, or are you talking about the layer 3 MTU, which is just the data without the header? You have to establish what you're actually talking about anytime you're referring to MTU or frame size with literally anyone else. Right, I should have moved to this slide first. Right, that's what I just said. Okay, moving on. Attacks. No, there's no such thing as an MTU attack. It's just how many bytes are there on the wire. And yeah, my first 2 points, I am pretty confident in this. If you think it's an MTU attack, no, it's just somebody being a dumbass. Or, the partner organization that you're connecting to not using the same definition of frame size as you did. more likely. Every piece of equipment that we use today reliably either drops or just ignores oversized packets. There's absolutely nothing wrong with undersized packets. They're normal. So, like, the only real attack vector would be, like, if you're thinking buffer overflow, no, that's pretty much a solved problem. I'm sure there is a piece of gear out there somewhere that is vulnerable to a buffer overflow attack somehow, in some way. I don't know what it is. I've never seen one in my career, but I mean, the stupidity of hardware designers is not to be underestimated. Fragmentation attacks, those are still a thing, surprisingly, in 2024. And that's when you're trying to send data that's too big to fit in one packet. A router somewhere along the way has to chop it up into pieces that fit into packets, and then a router at the other end has to put them back together. There's a whole category of fragmentation-based attacks that, you know, it's worth knowing about because your routers and your firewalls can't always just make them go away. The headers. So here we get to some meat. And wow, that's a lot of text, sorry. Every Ethernet device has what's called the burned-in address, the BIA. That's its default MAC address, period. Every single Ethernet port made today has a BIA of some sort. Maybe the firmware overrides it, maybe the software overrides it, maybe your config overrides it, but they all have one, and if you don't do anything, that's the address they're going to use to talk on the network. I'm only on slide 36 of 68, so we're going to stop pretty much at layer 2 today. As I said, the talk was adapted from an educational seminar, which would have been much longer than this. And these will be available for download later on. So MAC address, every time you see a MAC address, it corresponds to an Ethernet port. There are some very specialized exceptions. If you are doing one of those things, you will know that you are doing one of those things. It's not going to sneak up on you by accident. The MAC address is either 100% trustable or being spoofed as part of an attack. There's nothing in between. And, well, actually, sorry, there is. It's 100% trustable on one end, part of an attack, and it's being spoofed on the other end, or you've got a load balancer that does some really weird shit at layer 2, and it's perfectly legit. That is the middle ground. I have this later in the slides. Any sufficiently advanced troubleshooting is indistinguishable from an attack. And that is true throughout all the layers of networking. Now, it's not true once you get into the app layer, but in networking, yeah. If I'm trying to probe and find out, you know, why such and such a device isn't responding when I talk to it using such and such a MAC address, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to deliberately spoof MAC addresses in the packet to try and figure out just how exactly is this device broken. And if you don't know I'm doing that and you're looking at the wire going, what the hell are these packets? Oh my God, somebody's in our network and they're attacking us, because they look the same. The packets on the wire for an attack and for troubleshooting are identical. So please make sure you ask your network people if they're troubleshooting something instead of just assuming it's an attack. Please. People have gone to jail because of this. Like, I'm not joking. People have gone to jail because the security folks in an org couldn't tell the difference between an attack and troubleshooting. And yes, they got out of jail eventually, but like, I don't want to spend 3 nights in jail because somebody was not clued in. MAC address, multicast, two special MAC addresses. Broadcast, all ones, means everybody gets a copy of this packet no matter what. The other special category, the most common use case is ARP, which I talk about later. I'm not sure if we'll get there. I'm talking way too much. However, older routing protocols use broadcast. And the third most common source of broadcast addresses is bored students, AKA your future red teamers. And this is one of those I wish I was joking moments, but that's, yeah. The other special one in binary starts with, or sorry, in hex starts with 0, 1. Oh, hex 1 is binary 1, same thing, anyway. And that's multicast, which is some of you get this packet and process it. If it doesn't start with, if it's not all ones and it doesn't start with 01, then it's a unicast packet that's intended for a single device, period. So when you're looking at packets and you've pulled it up in Wireshark and you're trying to figure out like where is this going, look at the MAC address, it will tell you where it's going. It will tell you what device that packet is going to regardless of the layer 3 addresses contained in the packet. Layer 3 addresses can lie. Layer 2 addresses, more or less, cannot. So when you're trying to figure out what's going on, drill down. This is where your mostly ground truth lives. The multicast packets are very common. If you block multicast at layer 3, that's fine. If you block multicast at layer 2, you're going to have a very, very bad year. And everything else is unicast. I'm at timer. 5 minutes? Okay. Yeah, we're not going to get very far. VLANs. Okay, does anybody here not think that they don't really know how VLANs work? Okay, well, I'm going to just go out on a limb and say a bunch of you are wrong. You don't. Or at least not enough to make me happy, which is admittedly a slightly different thing. If you know how, everybody knows how VMs work now, virtual machines, in like KVM, VMware, whatever. And you're running different instances of something on a single piece of hardware. VLANs are the same thing. I am running multiple virtual LANs on a single piece of hardware. So if we didn't have VLANs and I wanted to segment, all my servers and do micro-segmentation, I would need one switch per server. And of course, then I would need one router port per switch, and your hardware needs just go through the roof. VLANs, literally, that's what they do. They virtualize LANs. They're not magic. They're not a security risk in and of themselves. Unless you have a specific, provable reason to distrust VLANs, and I'm willing to believe that some of you might, you can just trust the VLANs. I have been hearing, is it on here? No, and there's some details I don't care about. Header attacks, VLAN hopping attacks. I have been hearing rumors of VLAN hopping attacks for 20 years now. And it's always someone, there's always someone saying, oh, no, you can't trust VLANs. There's like this pool of zero-day VLAN hopping attacks out there that are just like waiting to be used. Well, they've been waiting to be used for 20 years. So, not impossible, but not likely. That is the most important part. This is the ground truth bits that unless you have a specific reason to distrust, you can trust. So do your threat modeling appropriately and don't just go, oh, well, it must be the network. Please. That will be my hour. Thank you very much.
for questions. Questions? Comments, concerns, questions?